Greetings, everyone, and welcome to Back to Ashes. My name is Phoenix. I'd like to take a moment and acknowledge the elite members of the channel. Thank you all for your dedicated and continued support. It means the world to me and the channel. With that being said, it is now time to go back to ashes. For once we arise from the ashes, we are a bigger, brighter, stronger, and a happier person every day. Sit back, relax, kick back, grab a snack, or tuck and get warm, and prepare for your dose of vocal melatonin entitled True Scary Stories. Right after this intro, there will be an ad. I'll read the first story, there will be an ad, and after that, there will be no more ads within this video. You always think you'll see it coming, the monster, that there will be a snarl, a shadow, a warning. But monsters don't crawl out of closets anymore. They wear your memories. They smile. It started like any cliche high school drama. I dated a boy on and off for years. He's now my husband. During one of our off seasons, I spiraled a bit, lost friends, got bored. COVID had locked us all away. I escaped into online gaming. That's how I met him, Kyle. He was just some guy from school I'd barely noticed before. But we got close, fast. I told him I wasn't ready for anything serious, and I meant it. But he didn't hear. Not yet. He heard, try harder. He became intense, clingy at first, then controlling. Emotional whiplash. One day he'd spam me with compliments. The next day he'd explode if I didn't reply in 5 minutes. He'd kick me from chats, guilt trip me in front of the group. I started feeling watched, like everything I said or did would be cataloged and twisted against me. We kissed once. That was enough for him to turn possessive, enough for me to cut ties. When I got back with my husband, Kyle didn't take it well. He wrote songs, dark, bitter lyrics, thinly veiled in metaphor, posted online for everyone to hear. I ignored them, told myself he would get over it. I was wrong. 1 year after graduation, we posted our engagement photos. It was supposed to be a celebration. Instead, it was an invitation. Almost immediately after the post went live, Kyle messaged me out of nowhere, said he wanted to catch up. My husband, ever the optimist, said yes. We figured he'd matured. We were wrong again. Kyle picked us up with a grin too wide, like it had been stretched onto his face. His eyes didn't match the smile. We went to the mall, grabbed food. It all felt rehearsed, like he was playing a role he didn't remember the lines for. Then the car ride started. The speed climbed. 80, 90, 110. He joked the seatbelts didn't work, laughed about not caring if he died, or if we did. Then came the words that sucked the air from the car. I think I might be psychotic. No fear, no shame, just fact. He said he didn't feel guilt, not even when people died. I pressed myself against the door, my body stiff. I could see my husband tense beside me. Kyle's voice was calm, detached, like he was describing the weather. We drove to a deserted park. Midnight. No lights. No sound but our own footsteps as we climbed the new mountain staircase. About halfway up, my old basketball injury flared up. I stopped. Thank God I stopped. Kyle kept going, turned around and yelled from a dark silhouette. Come up. The drop's insane. He stood right at the ledge, where the staircase abruptly ended in raw concrete and air. One wrong step. My husband shook his head. We're good. Back in the car, Kyle didn't speak until we were halfway home. If I had a gun right now, I don't know what I'd do. He said it flat, cold. My heart sank. We locked eyes. That's when I knew. This wasn't a tantrum. It wasn't jealousy. Something inside him had unraveled, and we were inches from the tear. A cop passed us by, and Kyle panicked. If he pulls us over, just say we were having a threesome, he muttered. It made no sense. We weren't drinking, weren't loud, but he looked like a man running for more than a traffic stop. He dropped us off in silence. No goodbye, just peeled out and vanished into the night. Did it feel like he was trying to kill us? My husband asked in low, afraid of the answer. No, I said. It felt like he wanted to. I was just waiting for the right moment. Kyle didn't message again for a while. Then, my husband shipped off for military training. I moved in with my parents, 30 minutes outside town. Quiet, rural, safe. Or so I thought. That's when the accounts started. Random burner profiles watching my Instagram stories. Always the first viewer. No posts, no followers. I'd block one, another would pop up. Again and again, etc. Then the messages. You're lucky. He's lucky. It could have gone differently, but I let it go. Let what go? It was Kyle. He finally admitted it. I blocked him again. But then I saw a car, his car, creep past the dirt road that led only to my parents' house. No one drove that road unless they were coming to us. I told myself it wasn't him, but I knew. Months later, after I moved across the country to join my husband on base, we got the call. Kyle broke into Sarah's house. Sarah, his ex, the girl who swore her baby wasn't his. He showed up out of nowhere, held the baby, then tried to take her. In the chaos, he stabbed Sarah. He was arrested. They searched his things. They found a notebook, dozens of pages. My name, Sarah's, our husband's, graphic violent fantasies, step-by-step breakdowns, what he'd do to us, what he'd do in front of our husbands. And if he couldn't, he'll end it, all of it. A page was dog-eared, a single sentence written over and over. The staircase was the perfect place. I think about that night too often. What if I hadn't had that injury? What if my husband hadn't been there to say no? What if that cop hadn't driven by and startled him? People say monsters live under beds. Mine wore a hoodie, laughed like we were old friends, and invited us on a walk. I don't sleep well anymore, because the scariest part isn't what he did. It's how close he came to doing worse. Vacation always has a way of lowering your guard. Maybe it's the sun, maybe it's the alcohol, or maybe it's just the lie we tell ourselves that we're somewhere safe because we paid for the illusion. Mexico has been beautiful so far. My wife and I were 2 days into our trip and completely enchanted by the slow rhythm of the beach town, the warmth of the locals, and the lazy pulse of the heat. That night, we returned to the hotel after dinner. The air was thick with salt and humidity, our bellies full, our minds loose. Our room was on the third floor, tucked in a corner of the building. The hallway was quiet when we got back, unnaturally so, and I noticed the Do Not Disturb tag fluttering against the door frame, like it was trying to warn us. We stepped inside. The room still held the faint scent of cheap cleaning products and sea air. I tossed my wallet and phone on the desk and kicked off my sandals. My wife was already rifling through the mini fridge. Nothing felt off. Not yet. Then, knock, knock. A pause. Then a voice, low and mumbled. Something in Spanish, just loud enough to be unsettled. Not a clear announcement like, room service. More like, someone trying to sound like room service. I glanced at my wife. She looked up from a bottle of water, eyes uncertain. "We didn't order anything," she whispered. "And the Do Not Disturb sign's still up," I said. Knock, knock. This time louder. Still the same low murmur from the other side. My wife gave a tiny nod toward the door. I walked over, slowly, and everything in me felt still, like my body knew something I didn't. Just as my hand reached the handle, click, the lock disengaged. The door swung inward about 3 inches. Standing just 2 feet from me was a man. His face was dirty, like he'd been sweating in the sun and hadn't showered in days. His clothes were disheveled, and worst of all, he looked surprised, like I wasn't supposed to be there. I slammed my palm flat against the door and shoved it shut before it could open further. He started speaking fast, too fast, but I caught the word, Wi-Fi. I don't speak Spanish, I said, my voice flatter than I meant. My wife stepped closer behind me. "It's working fine," she said. He paused, mumbled something in broken English and turned away. I deadbolted the door and turned the physical latch this time. My fingers were trembling slightly. We stood there for a moment, processing. "He had a key card," I whispered. "He thought we weren't home," she said. "He knocked, waited, then just let himself in." Bullshit about Wi-Fi. That was the cover story. Yeah, he was going to rob us. Or worse. That realization hit me harder than I expected. My body had gone cold. A few minutes later, I called the front desk. They took it seriously, or at least pretended to. They said they'd investigate. I didn't feel better. What stuck with me wasn't just the man at the door. It was how he acted. The casualness of it. Like this wasn't his first room. Like maybe he'd already tried others. Like maybe he had access. I barely slept that night. Every sound felt sharp and wrong. I kept watching the door, waiting for the handle to move. My wife eventually drifted off, but I stayed awake, too wired to rest. Around 3:33 a.m., I heard it. Click. Just the handle. Just a test. I rushed to the door. Deadbolt still engaged. But I felt it. Someone had tried. I waited a beat, then peeked through the peephole. The hallway was empty, except for the Do Not Disturb sign. It wasn't ours. It was identical, but it had the number 301 written on it in faint black ink. Our room number was 303. I looked again. and in the dim glow of the hallway light, I noticed the cameras. There weren't any. Only little black plastic domes, empty shells just for show. The front desk never followed up. No call, no knock, nothing. The next morning, I asked the manager if they'd found anything about the man who tried to enter our room. He smiled politely, too politely, and said it had been a misunderstanding and that the man had mistaken the room for someone else's. When I asked how he had a working key card, the manager's face faltered for just a second. Some guests, they never return their cards, he offered. Sometimes our security system doesn't clear them immediately. That didn't make sense. Not really. I pressed him again. What about the cameras? He looked at me confused. What cameras? The ones in the hallway, I said. He gave me a blank stare. We don't have cameras on the 3rd floor. That night, we packed most of our things early and stored our valuables in the room safe. My wife tried to stay upbeat, and I saw the way she kept glancing at the door. We double-checked the lock. Then again. Deadbolt, latch, chain. Still, I didn't trust it. We went to bed with the bathroom light on. The air conditioner droned, but beneath it, I kept imagining footsteps, a whisper, that same low knock. I finally drifted off around 2 a.m. Then, I dreamed I woke up, except I couldn't move. I was lying in bed, paralyzed, eyes wide open, watching the outline of the door. It opened slowly, and the dirty man from the night before crept in, silhouetted by the pale light from the hallway. But behind him came another figure, and another, and another. They wore hotel uniforms, but their faces were blurred. Wrong, and each of them held a master keycard in their hand. I tried to scream, but I couldn't even blink. The last thing I saw in that dream was one of them kneeling beside my sleeping wife, head tilting side to side like a curious dog, reaching slowly toward her face with something sharp and glinting. I really woke up gasping, sweating. The room was dark, AC still humming. I shot out of bed and ran to the door. It was still locked, still chained, still shut. But underneath the door, there was something. A folded piece of paper, like a note someone had pushed under in the middle of the night. I picked it up with shaking hands and unfolded it. There was no writing, just a drawing. A stick-figure couple, man and woman, in a bed, and standing next to them, drawn in thick black ink, a smiling figure with no face. In his hands, a keycard. I stared at it for a long time. My wife stirred behind me, asking what was going wrong. I never showed her the paper. Instead, I burned it in the bathroom sink using one of the complimentary matches from the restaurant downstairs. We left the hotel before sunrise, skipping the final day of our stay. I told the front desk we had a family emergency and needed to leave immediately. As we drove away, I looked back at the building one last time. And there, on the 3rd floor, just outside our room's window, I swear I saw someone standing, not waving, just watching. When I first moved to London, I was lonely in the way a man gets when the silence stretches just a little too long between breaths. I tried OkCupid, half-heartedly, hoping the occasional swipe might fill the gnawing emptiness in my new flat. Most of my messages fizzled out, my words too stiff, too dry, like dust settling on forgotten photographs. Then I saw her. She called herself Effa, a blonde with sharp green eyes and a kind of fierce beauty that made you sit up straighter. Not just hot, magnetic. We shared the same taste in obscure music and films, and she had a daughter named Rosin, which, oddly, didn't bother me. Her story was detailed, tragic even. Raised Catholic in Belfast during the Troubles, orphan youth. There was something bruised about her, something you wanted to hold and fix. I was an Afghan vet. Nothing scared me anymore. At least that's what I had told myself. We spoke for hours, first through Messenger, then voice calls, and occasionally Skype, though she always declined video, said her camera was broken. Still, she sent photos. Her daughter, friends. Sometimes tattoos appeared, then vanished from picture to picture. The inconsistencies were strange, but she was beautiful, mesmerizing, and I was lonely. She claimed to be a hairdresser in central London and also a bar owner in Camden, the Lock Tavern. Said she lived in a penthouse near Covent Garden. None of it added up, not with that job, but she had explanations. Money from family lost in the conflict, a benefactor, something vague. Her life sounded like a patchwork stitched from glossy magazine pages and Irish folklore. But I believed it. I wanted to believe it. The first time we planned to meet, she ghosted me, said her pub had a crisis, apologized, swore it wouldn't happen again. It did. Eventually, she began calling me late at night, said she had sleep paralysis, and I'd listen to her breathing slow on the other end of the line. Sometimes I swore I could hear someone else breathing too. Not her daughter. Someone older, deeper. But I never mentioned it. Months passed. Our talks grew sparse. I met someone else, a girl named Jo. When Effa called that night while I was out with Jo, I ignored her. But later, she called again, accusing. Said she knew I'd been out, knew what Jo looked like. Said one of the bouncers from her pub recognized me. How? That night, something twisted lodged itself in my stomach. The skin behind my ears prickled, the way it did when you were clearing compounds overseas. Weeks later, I was killing time around King's Cross when she texted, "Want to meet?" I agreed, not because I missed her, but because I needed to see her, to know if she was real. She told me to meet her in Camden at a Weatherspoon pub near her bar. She'd be late, but her friends would be there. A guy named Reese. Reese was a lanky ginger kid, maybe 21, Irish accent, polite and strangely eager. His friend, another pale, nerdy type, joined us. We drank. They asked a lot of questions about Effa, more than I liked. Then a man brushed too close to me in the queue. Overweight, pockmarked face, brown coat, a crucifix, tattoo on his neck. I said, "Excuse me." He didn't reply. Effa texted me, still delayed. I decided we'd head to her bar instead. When we got there, it looked legit. Irish flags flew. The bartender nodded when I asked if she was around. "She's upstairs," Reese said. She never came down. Instead, Another guy showed up, Pete. Reese greeted him like an old friend. "You're here for Eva?" Eva? I froze. Reese acted like it made perfect sense, that Eva was Effa's best friend. Pete's story mirrored mine. Same Irish origin, same daughter, Rosin, only his was 12. They'd never met either. Same failed dates, same late night invites, and the same photo of Rosin. Only Pete insisted it was Eva. And the phone number? The same one I had for Effa. Pete bolted, panic in his eyes. Just me and Reese now. I pushed past him and left. I was drunk, but my instincts were firing. I made my way to the tube, Northern Line. The platform was nearly empty. Then he appeared again. The man in the brown jacket, crucifix tattoo. He stared at me like he knew my name. Moments later, Reese stepped into the same carriage. He looked at the man and gave a subtle nod. I bolted as the warning chime rang, dodging closing doors and disappearing into the labyrinth of tunnels. I doubled back, switched lines, lost them. I didn't go home. I went to a friend's party in New Cross and crashed on her couch. Over the next few days, Effa called, texted, said we needed to talk. I never replied. I blocked the number. Eventually, she disappeared. Months later, I got curious. I searched her photos online using reverse image search. They weren't hers. They belonged to a dead girl, a real woman murdered in Belfast in 2006. Rosin, too, missing since 2009. A cold case, last seen near the Irish border with a woman matching Effa's description. The final twist? One night, I got a message from an unknown number. No text, just a photo. It was me, sitting on the tube, that same night, staring straight ahead. Behind me, over my shoulder, a blurry reflection in the window. The pockmarked man was smiling. So, to set the scene, I'm a female. I'm 22 and literally weeks from graduating from college and getting my bachelor's in theater arts. I only have a quarter credit left to get, so I'm doing work in the theater department's costume shop to get that credit. It's not anything too hard. I know how to both hand sew and use a sewing machine, so I spent time doing both things and mending and adjusting garments for actors. The show is a musical, and there are some pretty intricate costumes, so I was excited to help out, to finally get the final bit of credit and graduate. The costume shop opened for weekend hours at around noon, but I stayed up late on Friday night, so I woke up at around 1. I got dressed and went to the costume shop as quickly as I could, since I wanted to get all the hours possible. Nothing was out of the ordinary. But as I was approaching the theater building, something caught my eye. There was this guy standing off to the side of the front entrance. The front entrance is pretty open. It's this set of pillars and then 3 sets of glass doors that are led up to by a set of steps. Kind of Grecian, I guess. The building is an old one with an addition attached. That one containing the actual theater, while the other buildings contain mainly classrooms, but this entrance is closest to the way I usually use to get backstage and into the costume shop. Anyway, the guy was kind of leaning against the stone side of the staircase. What caught my attention is that I go to school on a very small campus, So usually when I see someone, I recognize their face, even if I don't know their name. I didn't recognize this guy at all, physically. He wasn't overly weird looking, maybe a little disheveled. His hair was kind of greasy, and he had on a t-shirt and some tattered jeans. He looked college age, same as me. But what was even weirder was that he was wearing this heavy winter parka, even though it was nearing 65 degrees, as well as snow boots. We made eye contact, and nothing immediately skeeved me out. I'm an awkward person, so I just kind of gave a polite nod and a smile. I think that was my first mistake. He didn't smile back. In fact, his eyes followed me as I walked up the stairs and into the building. Super weird, but okay. My campus has some weirdos on it. I've found that my school in particular seems to attract them, but I'm a senior and I was pretty sure I had all of the weirdos pretty much cataloged. Parka Guy was not among my mental catalog of campus oddities. I got down to the costume shop and I must have looked troubled because the person who was already down there, someone I know on a somewhat personal level, greeted me, then asked if something was wrong. I told them about the guy, which somewhat amused them, and we speculated on who it could be for a while before they went up to check. Apparently, though, he was gone, as I was told when they got back. I worked on sewing literal halved beach balls into bikini tops. The show was a funky one. And listened to a podcast. I got there at 1, and it was around 4:30 that the person there with me left, leaving me alone. By this point, I moved on from the tops and was sewing some snaps onto the back of a blouse to make it fasten better. I took a break to work on a project due Monday. The senioritis is strong. Then got back to sewing. My headphones off this time as it was just me down in the shop. For the next part, I'm going to have to give you a bit of an idea of the layout of the shop. It's in the basement of the building, and it's a bit hard to get to if you don't know your way around. The room is relatively large. It's sort of shaped like an irregular rectangle, but it's separated by the tables set up in the middle of the room with the sewing machines on them. One side is the way in from backstage behind the building's black box theater, as well as the dressing rooms, and then the other side leads out into this sort of hallway that has doors leading into the auditorium, as well as an exit out of the building. If that made any sense at all, I'm glad. That direction also leads to the main costume storage room. But anyway, near where the sewing machine tables is, this door that leads outside and into what the costume director refers to as the weird little courtyard. When I was a freshman, I took a class with her, and she warned us not to go out there since the door is locked from the outside. And if we go out there, we won't be able to get back into the building. The courtyard is less of a courtyard and more of some kind of area where a bunch of the building's machinery for like heating and cooling as well as the electrical stuff is located. It's all fenced in with a chain link fence about 15 feet high, but the door leading out there is one of those doors with a window. In this situation, I was sitting in a chair directly opposite this door, close to the wall, across from it. So there was about maybe 20 odd feet of space between me and this door. It was nearing 6, but since the show's dress rehearsals started that Monday, I wanted to get as much done as I possibly could before I finished up and went for dinner. I was working on sewing the snaps onto the shirt when I heard a noise. It startled me. Since I'd settled onto the rhythm of my task and listening to what my podcast was talking about, and annoyingly, I dropped my needle. It was still connected to the thread, so it wasn't lost. and I bent to pick it up from where it had fallen to the floor near my feet. It was then I lifted my head from that bent position when I saw the source of the noise. My vision was a little obscured because the space between me and the door was cluttered with a bunch of dress-form mannequins that me and the other members of the crew had been using to put costume pieces on. So it was more that I saw the door's window wasn't empty anymore. I shifted to the side a little to get a better look, and there, at the door leading out into the maintenance courtyard, was Parka Guy. The noise I heard had been him trying to open the door. I have no idea how he got in there. That door is the only way into that courtyard. So I can only assume he somehow scaled a 15-foot fence. I froze, like a deer in the headlights, and for a moment, it was just still as he stared at me, and I stared at him. His face was expressionless, and it was as he continued to stare at me that I began to realize that this entire situation was wrong. I sort of settled back into my chair, not sure what to do, and it was in this handful of seconds that Parka Guy started trying to open the door again. It was, as I said before, locked, so he wasn't able to open it, thank God. It's puzzling to me now that he didn't just come in through the main entrance, as none of the doors leading down to the costume studio were locked. But maybe he tried that because, like I said, the studio is a little tricky to locate if you don't know your way around the building. The only conclusion I could come up to is that he tried what I mentioned above, couldn't find me, and then, while wandering around the building, saw me through the door through the chain-link fence and proceeded to scale it. It was at that point that I began to get scared. The door leading into the studio was to my left, and on instinct, I got up to close it, since it locks from the inside and you need a key to reopen it. It was as I was moving to close that door that the guy began to pound on the courtyard door. I don't know why my first instinct was to hide instead of opening up the damn door I had just closed and booking it, but I went into the small fabric storage room directly behind me, shut the door, and called campus safety. I'm not really sure why I called them and not the police. Campo called them later, but that's what I did. I don't know, people make decisions like that when they're scared. By the time campus safety came to investigate, which was pretty fast since I was clearly terrified on the phone, the guy was gone. I don't know how he scaled the fence again in the time it took them to arrive, but he was gone. Campus safety escorted me back to my dorm and even went over to the dining hall to pick me up some dinner, since I was very shaken, which I appreciated a lot. A while later, an officer came to take my statement since Campo called them. But as you can imagine, there wasn't much they could do apart from keep an eye out for this guy. I still have no idea who he was or why he was on campus, but it couldn't have been for a good reason. So I hope the Parka guy that tried to break into the costume shop to do God knows what to me is never seen around campus ever again. Joshua Tree has always felt like a second home, a sacred place of twisted rock and silence, where the desert stretched wide enough to swallow you whole. Every spring I return like clockwork, long before smartphones tethered us to safety or GPS made getting lost harder than it should be. Back then, the roads inside the park were mostly sand, no water stations, no rangers, just sun-scorched quiet, and the occasional coyote crying slicing through the dark. The kind of place where the air buzzed with something unspoken, a presence that didn't want to be known, only felt. We camped near a half-ridden cave we'd used for years, tucked behind the granite swell. It stayed cool, even in the fiercest sun, and I'd grown used to the way shadows clung to it, way after the light had faded. That year, everything felt off. There was construction in the park, men in fluorescent vests hauling equipment and tearing the desert's skin open in the name of progress. A trailer full of workers camped nearby, drinking loudly at night, their poker games echoing like laughter from ghosts. We met Chris early in the trip, kind, lean, soft-spoken, with the tan of someone who lived under sun and sky. He biked to work at a diner miles away. Don't ask me how. And seemed more plant than person, rooted in the desert. He hated the construction, said they were paving over something sacred. Then there was the woman at the end of the cul-de-sac. She muttered to herself, hung bottles from trees, and built shrines out of bones and wire. I avoided her eyes. They didn't look at you so much as through you, like she knew the shape of your death. And then came him. He drove a cream-colored Toyota with Delaware plates, dressed in pressed khakis and loafers, like he'd wandered out of an office building and into the abyss. His name started with a D. Darren, David, doesn't matter. What mattered was the feeling. The moment he approached our camp, my skin went cold. I used to be a therapist, and I know the signs. Charm that cuts too deep. Smiles that don't touch the eyes. Every answer he gave was deflected back at us. Every question from us twisted into something we didn't quite remember asking. My climbing partner, wide-eyed and sociable, gave him everything. Her name, her school, where we were going next. I memorized his license plate, his car, his voice. Something in me said, "You will need this." He joined us for dinner, stayed long after the fire dimmed. I could feel his gaze on my friend. Too intense, too hungry. We made plans for a spaghetti dinner the next night. Chris would come. Dee said he'd bring wine, but Chris never showed. His site was untouched, bike still there, but no Chris. Dee showed up alone. He said Chris told him to meet him later, off one of the jeep trails, deep in the desert, far beyond where cell service or headlights could save you. My gut twisted, but I agreed to drive. It took hours. Dee sat behind my friend, a backpack heavy on his lap, like it held more than just water. I couldn't shake the thought. There's a gun in there, or rope, or both. When we arrived, the trailhead was dark. Only stars above. No sign of Chris. No tire tracks. Not even footprints. "This is the spot," Dee said, already unbuckling. "We have to hike in." I didn't move. "We're not getting out." He stared at me in the rear view, jaw clenched, fingers white around the straps of his pack. I told him he could walk if he wanted. I'd be heading back. Silent. Then he sank back into a seat, furious. The drive home was longer in the dark. That night, we slept in my Subaru, pitch black tent and a machete in reach. We whispered about Dee, about how his strange answers, the way he looked at her, like he was studying a puzzle he planned to break. At dawn, he was at our site. "I stopped by your tent," he said casual. "Where were you?" I lied. Said we slept in the cave. His smile didn't reach his eyes. We told him we were leaving, heading back to Carlsbad Caverns. He nodded, said he'd meet us there. But we weren't going to Carlsbad anymore. We were going anywhere but. Chris's sight was still undisturbed, his bike still leaning against the stone. The woman with the shrines said she hadn't seen him in days. We drove out. I kept the machete on the dashboard the whole time. Years have passed. I searched for D online. Nothing. No arrest. No missing person report for Chris. No record of a Delaware man with a Toyota being charged with anything. Just the silence of the desert, swallowing stories it doesn't want told. But here's the part I never told anyone. A month later, I got a postcard. No return address, just a copy of the same desert road where D had told us to stop. Scrawled across the back in neat, precise handwriting. "You should have come hiking." I am currently a 21-year-old female. I have lived alone since I was 18. When I was around 18 or 19, I would often take walks to a park that wasn't too far from my apartment complex. I had a boyfriend, he's an ex-boyfriend now, at the time, who was a couple months older than me, but unfortunately was at work when I decided to go out for my walk. I should mention now that there is a bus stop at the left end of my street that wasn't too far from the park. I remember stopping at the end of the block, waiting for cars to let me pass. Then I, for some reason, looked over at the bus stop and saw a man staring me down. After noticing this, I really didn't care if the cars would let me pass or not. So I just walked into the road. I did almost get hit, but I just walked to be far away from that guy. There was a high school that was probably 5 to 10 minutes away from the park. I remember looking back at the school because it was a school I was currently attending at that time. Then I saw that man, who was staring me down from the bus stop, was following me. I started slightly panicking. I think I even texted my ex-boyfriend about how I'm pretty sure I was being followed. I kept looking back behind me and made sure that there was a good sizable distance between him and I. I knew if I would have had slowed my pace, something bad was going to happen. I eventually got to the park and started getting really anxious. My reasons being, 1, the park entrance was down a hill and split into 2 separate paths that you couldn't see into due to the trees simply being in the way. 2, knowing that nobody would have been able to see what could have happened to me if I chose to go down one of those 2 paths. 3, I was off from work and school that day, and it was 2 p.m., which typically meant nobody was in the park around that time. As I started walking down the winded hill, I saw a woman with 2 kids and a dog. I remember the instant relief. Furthermore, the safety I felt when seeing her. I even picked up my pace to get to her quicker because I was scared out of my mind. I still remember the exact conversation I had with her to this day. "Hi, I know this may seem weird, but I live down the hill, and while I was crossing the intersection where the bus stop was at, I noticed this man. He was staring me down, then started following me. Can you just act like you know me if this man comes down here?" Before she could even reply, I tilted my head up to the man, who was about to come down the hill. When I did that, I think he slightly panicked and started walking away. She saw the seriousness of the situation and gathered her kids up into the stroller. I don't know what made him decide to do this next, but as she was trying to get things packed up, he, at some point, turned back around and was now coming down the hill. I told her that he was coming, and the woman moved quicker than ever to get things packed up, and I even started helping. As he walked up to us, he immediately started trying to ask me questions. I can't remember what all he said, but I remember the woman was pretty much answering for me. I guess he had tried to ask if we knew each other, which of course she lied by telling him she did know me, and I was coming down to walk back with her. I do know I backed her up with this claim. I just wanted that guy to leave me and now her alone. He asked us a couple more questions, and eventually we excused ourselves and started our way back up the hill. I remember the woman I had met walked with me all the way down to the intersection where the bus stop was across from. She was clearly very scared for me due to the fact the guy had eventually started following me and her back. I felt so bad for her dragging her into that situation. I didn't know if he would try to follow me all the way back home if we broke off there, or if he would just decide to aim new focus onto the woman who was just simply at a park playing with kids she was babysitting. Before he got too close to us, I walked over to some construction workers who were now working on the high school sign. I explained the whole situation to them and told them about how we thought it was weird how the man was initially just following me, was now following me and the lady. I pleaded with them to call the cops if he went past the bus stop or started following the lady. The construction workers happily agreed. Then the woman and I went on our own ways. I don't know what happened to that man. I don't know if he was arrested or not. However, an hour later, my ex-boyfriend had gotten home from work. We went out to run errands, and as we were driving up the hill, there were 4 police cars parked around the intersection where I told the construction workers to call the police if the man was still trying to follow me. I'm just glad the police were called, especially with a high school being so close. I couldn't have forgiven myself if he had tried to follow some poor high school kid just walking home. So, to the man who was wearing a red and blue puffer jacket, who decided to follow me to a place I would go to that I considered peaceful, content, and safe, thank you for teaching me to be more aware of people. I hope you're locked behind bars and we never meet again. When I was 20 years old, I worked at a summer camp in New Hampshire. It was a sleepaway camp, so we'd spend 10 weeks living on the lake, running activities throughout the day with our campers. The camp itself is one of the largest sleepaway camps in New England and has 400 or so campers come through every 2 weeks. The ages range from 6 to 15 years old. The property is a square mile in and of itself, with nothing connected to the plot of land besides some running trails that go off into the woods in a few directions. It was my 3rd summer working there, and I'd been promoted to a position that didn't require me to live in one of the 40 or so cabins with campers. Therefore, after all the campers had been accounted for, I had more freedom to do things like watch a movie or work out before bed. Protocol for the camp was at 9:30, so all campers were in bed. There would be 2 senior counselors assigned to be on duty, which basically meant doing their rounds on the golf cart to see if campers or counselors had snuck out, which was actually pretty common. I'd been on duty a couple of times, and it normally consisted of flashing your flashlight around the cart path as you drove around and then going back to hang out in the staff lounge. This is all important info as to how the camp basically shut down and nobody would be out on the property after 9:30 p.m. One night, I was working out in the gym with another counselor after campers and counselors had bedded down for the night. The gym itself was an older building that doubled as a stage for talent shows and fit a full basketball court inside as well. The gym was a tiny closet, basically, tucked away in the corner. When the lights were on at night, the reflection in the windows that surround the perimeter of the building was basically a mirror. While my buddy Jack and I were lifting, we heard something out on the basketball court. So we stepped out of the gym to investigate. We found a rock the size of a cherry, maybe, about halfway across the wood basketball court. Confused, we just figured something fell from the roof and went back to working out and chatting. About 5 minutes later, we hear what is unmistakably a rock sliding across the floor. I rushed out to see if someone was playing a prank and trying to scare us. I started loudly talking. If I was out there, I'd get back to my cabin quickly before OD, meaning on-duty counselors, catches me out. I nervously joked with Jack about how it was probably senior campers, 15 years old or so, trying to play a prank that they'd laugh about over breakfast the next day. I remember my heart beating a bit harder after the silence on the other end of my indirect warning. I looked around and saw a rock the size of a lime or so, and was kind of surprised. Everyone, camper or counselor alike, knew that the camp was a bit older, so they took maintaining it very serious. Something like damaging the wood floors in the gym would cause a pretty stern reaction from the senior leadership. As we kept working out, almost to stand our ground and show we weren't scared, I remember looking at myself in the reflection of the window. Like I said, you couldn't see anything on the outside of the gym building, which was located on the edge of the property with 2 entrance points, one facing the entire rest of the camp, with big sliding barn doors, the other facing the perimeter of the property, which was thick, dark woods, with nothing for at least a mile. What started making my hair stand up was that whoever was doing this was watching us from outside the gym. I had the thought that I could be looking right at them out the window and have no clue. At that point, another 5 to 10 minutes passed and nothing more had happened. Until I heard a giant thud. I immediately dropped the weights and ran around the corner to see a rock slightly smaller than a basketball had been thrown and bounced 10 feet or so across the wooden floors. I was shocked and knew at this point whoever was doing it was not someone from the camp. I know for a fact that no camper, and especially nobody in the staff, would throw a rock that big because it would certainly chip the floor, which it did. My body went into fight or flight. I stormed into the dark doorway that was open and facing the woods, on the edge of the property, and said, "All right, stop messing around. Matt, if that's you, I'm telling," enter owner's name here. Matt was who was on duty that night and was the only person I think it could have been. Mind you, this took place over the course of a half hour, and if it had been campers that snuck out, they would have turned back quickly after the first rock out of fear of being caught by the on-duty counselors on their rounds. Looking back, I shouldn't have stood in the doorway, looking into total blackness while completely illuminated by the light behind me filling the gym. Worst case, they could have thrown a rock right at me, and given how far they'd thrown the large one, it would have done some damage. I turned back after accusing Matt, and hoping it scared off whoever it really was. But then my stomach dropped. I saw the golf cart coming from the opposite direction. I knew it wasn't Matt now, for sure, and I bolted across the court to the other entrance. As the golf cart pulled up, I slid the door open with Jack, and we jumped down the set of steps leading to the opening. I said, "Matt, someone's over there. They've been throwing rocks into the building. They messed up the court. You gotta call the owner." We quickly jumped on the back of the golf cart, and Matt started whipping around the side. But when we got there, whoever it was had disappeared. Based on where the rocks were coming from and where Matt's lights on the cart were pointed, the only direction the person could have gone was off the property into the woods. There was nothing that direction for over a mile. When we got back to the staff lounge, I was still scared out of my wits. I'd never had the hair on the back of my neck stand up in a true fight or flight response before. I don't get scared easily, but rethinking through all of this gives me goosebumps again. It was just the feeling of someone sitting out there in the pitch black, watching us from the outside for over half an hour at about 10:30 at night. There were no cars in the area as the gates go shut every night, so someone walked through those woods, saw us in the building, and scared the crap out of us. Then crept back into the total darkness after they were done and went on their way. So whoever was out there that night, I hope we never meet again. And that, dear listeners, brings a close to these true scary stories. Before I go any further, I would like to thank the rest of the membership of Back to Ashes and to the new listeners. Thank you all so much for your dedicated support, and to the new listeners, thank you so much for listening in to one of my stories here on Back to Ashes. And as I always like to say, without you, I don't have a voice, and this channel would not exist. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. If you are sleeping, I hope Slumberland is treating you comfortably. If you're awake, I hope you've enjoyed these selections. Until next time, please stay vigilant out there. I'll be reading to you soon. Have yourself a good morning, a good afternoon, or a good evening. Peace, love, and light to you all.